And I wanted to start off and talk a little bit about censorship because it's something you've talked about for a long time, but I didn't really feel it until April of this year when we started having conversations with people and we had a narrative that was different than the mainstream media, different than the government, and we were censored on the technology platforms. Ofcom wouldn't allow our programs to be put on television. We were attacked by the BBC and a lot of publications. And it was a really bumpy ride, John. And before I
understand a lot of this, let me ask you a couple of questions. You've been doing this for 9 years.
Yeah, 9 years, didn't have a single
years without any problems. And then in April, you did something that was not on the beaten track. And you got which, can I ask, what did people complain about?
Well, what happened is we started the lockdown here and, the government was kind of saying, this is what's happening. And we started asking questions about, are we sure of the details? And let's talk about the science. And we started having different conversations than the government and the mainstream media was having. And as opposed to just have those ideas out there, free speech, to let people decide for themselves, we got shut down. It was almost like they were treating our viewers not like adults, but almost as children that had to be protected.
But I ask you, were they criticizing you or were they actually shutting you down so that you couldn't broadcast?
Well, great question. So YouTube, which is, the biggest really video streaming platform in the world, on April 6th, John, we did the second largest YouTube live stream in the world. So it was massive. 65,000 people were watching concurrently.
Why was it so big?
Because we were talking about ideas that were different than the government. We were asking the government, okay, tell us more about this. Why do we have to lock down? Is it really what the right thing to do? And what happened is 30 minutes later, the episode was deleted and then we were banned from continuing to stream on YouTube. So it was really interesting to see the Facebooks and the Instagrams and the YouTubes really shut us down. And it was my first introduction, John, to this world of censorship and mainstream media attacks. So it was a real introduction for me to this whole new world that I think you've been talking about for a long time.
Yes, but you see, because I'm a comedian and therefore what I do isn't serious, I don't think anybody's ever got to the point of closing me down. I mean, sometimes they get upset because somebody said a word, like a recent thing with the Major on 40 Towers, but nobody's ever closed me down. It seems to me at first sight to be an absolute disgrace. I mean, the whole point of a democracy, of a society where people feel free to live their own lives and to express their own thoughts, so not being allowed to challenge the government, is an absolute disgrace. And there seems to be at the moment a wave of authoritarianism all over the world, whether you look at Russia or China or India or Israel, but now even here. I mean, we knew it was always the case in America. I couldn't believe under George W. Bush, the people who said we shouldn't be invading Iraq, they got a whacking. An absolute verbal whacking. Nobody was interested in anything they had to say or whether it might throw light. And now everybody knows the government was wrong and lying anyway. So it's terribly important that we get to speak. But I think that's disgraceful. Of course, we should be discussing the various ways, but we should be discussing them with an open mind and basically asking questions of the other side rather than just attacking the other side.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, free speech is something I kind of grew up with, at least the concept of that in America, and same in Britain. And so when we started having these ideas, it was strange that someone would want to shut an idea down as opposed to let it stand on its own merit.
I think it's because England's changed, or maybe I should say the UK, but I'm quite old, as you know. I'm 81 in a couple of weeks. In 1956, the British concocted a most ridiculous plan with the French and the Israelis to attack the Suez Canal, which Nasser had just nationalized. And the BBC took a very critical attitude to this. And there was a lot of argument, but it was pretty civilized because the debating in those days was quite intelligent. And it was until relatively recently. I have a very good friend. He edits my books, and he's one of the brightest people I know. And a few weeks ago, he said he'd been watching TV interviews from the 70s, and he instanced one where Roy Jenkins was arguing with Wedgwood Men. And he said they obviously didn't like each other, but it was civilized. They were answering each other's arguments with other arguments and facts. And the whole thing was intelligent and civilized. Well, you don't see that on television now. We have become a tabloid culture. Ever since basically Murdoch took over, because the reason Murdoch was at the beginning of the tabloid culture is he was the first the first editor, or rather a newspaper owner, the first newspaper owner who didn't want to become a lord. Up to that time, they'd always kept their noses clean because they, more than anything in the world, they wanted a peerage. Murdoch didn't give a damn. So he just went down market and took everyone else down market too. And since then, the culture has been deteriorating, becoming less intelligent, less civil, less well-informed, and more sort of based on emotion. I mean, now, as far as I could make out, there's a lot of people who get involved in the arguments about transgender who have interesting things to say, but who think that anyone who disagrees with them must hate them. Now, that's insanity.